Teach Like a Champion, Technique 7, Reject Self Report, presented by Uncle Dan's Homeschool Academy.
Hi, today we're going to be talking about Replace Self-Report. This is from Teach Like a Champion 3.0. It's Technique 7 in the Check for Understanding section. We start off with a common question that teachers ask in the middle of a lesson, and they'll stop at a kind of a natural point and ask, do you understand? Or could also be, are you clear on all of this? Are there any questions? These kinds of things. And this is basically a self-report, and it's ineffective. And there are lots of reasons, but one of the big reasons is what happens if nobody answers? Do you understand? Everybody just sits there. Do you take that as a yes, or do you take that as a no? It gives us no real information about what we need to know. So what's happening in the students' heads when we ask this question? Do you understand? Do you get it? Are we clear? Can we move on? All of these kinds of questions. First of all, we have to understand that there are unknown unknowns. So even if the student thinks they understand what's been taught, they may not know that they don't know. There's also really a common research topic about how students watch a video and then they think they understand, and they judge themselves as understanding. When they're asked specific details about that video, 10 minutes later, they're unable to answer really basic, simple things about what happened in the video. We can't really trust students to report for themselves what they know or don't know. Students may have this kind of false confidence where they think they know, or they're used to understanding, or they do well in school, so they think they get it, or they understand a part of it, but the part of it feels like all of it. They may actually not understand. They may understand something completely different, but they don't know that they understand something completely different because they saw what they saw and they think they got it. So that's a misconception or misunderstanding. Especially students may bring in misconceptions from previous classes or from home life or from television or something like that. And one of the things that we need to put into, especially science classes, is correcting for common misconceptions. So there may be social barriers to answering. So students may realize that they don't know, or may feel like they're not completely confident, but they don't want to be the one person who raises their hand and holds up the class or looks stupid in front of the class or whatever they're thinking. There's a peer pressure thing going on where let's just move on, let's just go on. And the teacher is involved in that peer pressure. That's not really peer pressure, but the teacher is involved in that pressure. So, the teacher wants to get moving on too. We'll cover that in a second. But a lot of that leads to this situation where even if the student knows that they really don't understand, they're going to let it go and figure, I'll try to get it later. And let's be honest, we're in teacher training sessions. That's happening with adults. You can expect that younger students will do it even more because they're less confident. We have confident adults who are professionals and professionally trained, and they're still not telling you that they don't understand, still thinking to themselves, yeah, I'll figure it out later. I don't want to hold up the whole group. So all this stuff is happening in the students' heads, and we can't really know which one. When we try to get rid of self-report, we're trying to get rid of that, all that kind of uncertainty. But the good thing about self-report is it's a good indicator. We should probably be asking questions at this point. So anytime that you see yourself or you see your teachers asking, hey, do you get it? We good? Everybody okay? This is the time to do a check for understanding. And that's the signpost for us to say, hey, we really need to ask questions that are targeted. So how do we reject self-report? We don't just give more options. So a lot of times you see teachers try to ramp up self-report. Oh, give me 1 to 5 fingers. How well do you understand? Or give me thumbs up, side, or down. How well do you get this? That's still self-report. Still has all these same problems we talked about. Okay. So really the best thing we can do is ask really simple knowledge level questions, kind of review questions. And a lot of teachers are already doing this and are well trained to do this, but it's easy to get out of the habit. Just a couple of comprehension questions, review questions. Make sure that you've thought of those questions beforehand and they're targeted. They're like the most important things, the most important takeaways of this section of the class. If you're doing explicit instruction, and I'm a big fan of explicit instruction, make sure they're after that embedded in the direct instruction portion, the I portion. Embedded in the I portion is some of these questions, which is basically get down to, did you get that? You may not be able to connect stuff. We're going to do the connecting activities later, but you've got the basic knowledge level stuff. And the last point on this slide is take care of your classroom culture. In our classroom culture, we want to make sure that asking these kinds of questions is a positive thing, right? It's a positive. We're not trying to get gotchas. We're not trying to create a lot of pressure on the students. This is really just we're checking if the students are ready for us to move on or not. If they're not, we need to fix it. So there's always this pressure to move on, even if the students, most of the students didn't get it. We got to move on. How many times have I heard that walking through classrooms? Say, oh, okay, we got to move on. But if stuff is really prerequisite, and then we need to make sure that those students have those prerequisites. So make sure you take a minute. It doesn't have to be long, but make sure you take a minute to do a real check. So it may feel like if I just say, hey, are we clear? And then there's no answer. Everybody's kind of not. Then you're like ready to move on. And it took 5 seconds. But you take a minute and ask those couple of questions and figure it out. And then maybe have another minute to address misconceptions if we find it. But at the same time, we need to engineer efficiency. So for me, I really feel like I like to have a routine for this. Several different kinds of ways that I do this, but the students all understand exactly how it's going to work. So they're good at it and I'm good at it, but it's not exactly the same way every time, so that it gets boring for the students. But you have tools here to pull out of your tool belt in ways to ask questions that are quick and the students understand and how to do it. I don't mean the content. Students understand how to do this check for understanding phase, and then we can get through it quickly, efficiently, but actually get really good data on whether the students are understanding or not. A couple of cleanup points. I have some other things. So a lot of teachers are really good at this last part, or they've been trained at least on this last part. Do your check for understanding before you move on. A lot of them are like that. But what a lot of teachers don't do is the routine part. So you've got a task. And we need to make sure that the students understand the task and perform the task before we let them go off and do something for 5 minutes and then they misunderstood the task. And that's something that a lot of teachers don't actually do. So before I start I'm going to ask a couple of check for understanding questions about the task and what the students are going to be doing in the task, especially if we're going to be doing some kind of, let's say we're doing a jigsaw. And I'm going to break everybody up into 6 groups. I'll say, all right, everybody in group 1, raise your hand now. Because I've already told everybody where they are. This is our check for understanding. Everybody in group 1, raise your hand. Everybody in group 2, raise your hand. Everybody in group 3, raise your hand, etc. So we can see that they know where they're going to go. That's a big one, so they don't go to the wrong place. And we've got our protocol out on the board. And what's your step 1 on your protocol? What are you going to do? Ask one of the students. And after you finish that, what are you going to do? Those kinds of things. Generally, for your checks for understanding, you're going to use cold call, which is another technique, which I've described in another video. But basically, you'll call students not by hands. You'll actually call students who you think probably are going to be the ones who maybe wouldn't get it. So there are some students, maybe they've got attention deficit issues, or they've got other issues, language issues. So if you can check that to those students who are normally the ones who are struggling, if they've got it, then you can be pretty sure that most of the students who normally track also will be tracking. But don't pick on them. Again, we'll take care of your classroom culture and don't make students feel like you pick on them at all. You can use a small sample, a representative sample from high-performing, mid-performing, low-performing students. We can use show me. A lot of times I used to teach a technique called show me fingers. So I'd have some kind of multiple choice kind of question. And I'd ask everybody to show me fingers. And I adapted this with something from Teach Like a Champion after I started reading Teach Like a Champion, which was rock, scissors, paper, shoot, which is great. So because everybody shoots at the same time. But it's not really important that everybody shoots at the same time for show me, because if people are slow and looking around, you've already got that data that, they don't know. So that's all you want. So you know that those students aren't sure, and you can do a call on them. The last thing I want to bring up is Brighten Lines is another technique, and I want to apply it here. So make sure that if you're doing that direct instruction part, that you really delineate well. Use the timbre of your voice, the way you're standing, your body language, to show that we are in a different phase. So students understand, hey, we've moved from, hey, I'm demonstrating something, to now I'm checking. that's important that you change that voice, change that body language. And the last point for this technique is don't be too hard on yourself or your teachers. If you're a teacher trainer, a lot of teacher trainers are really rough on this. I heard you asked, is everybody okay? This is a really hard thing to get rid of. It is something that is ingrained in us for tens of years to ask this question. And it's probably going to be impossible to completely eradicate it. But again, we need to focus on the fact that we asked that question. Therefore, we should know, hey, I need to do a real check for understanding and not self-report here. Okay, so that's the thing we need to be driving, and not bashing your teachers or yourself if you're a teacher. Not bashing your teachers or yourself over, oh my God, I said, has everybody got it? Oh, and I'm looking on a video, took a video of my class and we're going through with the teacher trainer. Don't be too hard on yourself for that. Keep raising awareness of the fact that if you're asking that question, that you immediately think, okay, I need to ask a better question than that. And it's not a sin to ask that question as long as you make that jump and say, oh yeah, okay, I need to ask some better questions. And I will, as usual, bring in my scripted questions speech, which is that if you're going to ask these kinds of questions, think about them beforehand. Think about what kind of answers you want. What are good answers? So you know that you can use right is right. You can use stretch it. What kind of questions you're supposed to ask, how much wait time you're supposed to give, what kind of answers you should expect, and then how you're going to respond if you don't get those answers that you've got. So I want to thank you. This was Replace Self-Report, Teach Like a Champion 3.0, Technique 7, Check for Understanding section. I'm Daniel Bowe, and I'll see you in the next video.
Thank you for listening to Technique 7, Reject Self Report, from Uncle Dan's Homeschool Academy.